State of Georgia, on or about the 5th day of January 2011, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement in a matter within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department, to wit, accused told Lieutenant D. Barnes and Deputy Chief D. Size that she did not know what had happened to Russell Sneiderman at the time she had arrived at Dunwoody Prep, when in fact she knew that Russell Sneiderman had been shot prior to her arrival at Dunwoody Prep. Count 6 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that she was not romantically involved with Henry Newman, such statement being material to the issues surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 7 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that none of Henry Newman's feelings for her were ever returned, such statement being material to the issue surrounding murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 8 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of false statements in matters within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1020 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 19th day of November 2010, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement during an official investigation into the murder of Russell Sneiderman, to which she told Detective A. Thompson that she had made it clear to Henry Newman that she did not want him to pursue her romantically. Count 9 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that she did not share a hotel room with Henry Newman in Longmont, Colorado, such statement being material to the issue surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 10 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of false statement in matters within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1020 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 5th day of January 2011, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement to Lieutenant D. Barnes and Deputy Chief D. Size, to wit, she denied that Henry Newman was in Longmont, Colorado in July 2010 with accused. Count 11 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given an oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that at the time she was in Longmont, Colorado with Henry Newman, she believed he was there on business for General Electric, such statement being material to the issues surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 12 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given an oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding to a point in question, to wit, that she and Henry Newman did not kiss while in Greenville, South Carolina, such statement being material to the issues surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 13 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, State of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, the accused testified it was due to her mother's, Bonnie Greenberg's, concern for the accused's safety that she did not immediately report for her suspicions of Henry Newman's involvement in the murder of Russell Sneiderman to the Dunwoody Police Department, such statement being material to the issues surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman, contrary to the laws of the state, the good order, peace, dignity thereof, signed Robert James, the district attorney. To all of these charges, Andrea Sneiderman has entered a plea of not guilty. She is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Also, at the conclusion of the trial, you will have the indictment out with you along with the other evidence, also with a proposed verdict form, in which all of you must freely and voluntarily agree based upon the evidence that you have heard during the course of this trial. Ladies and gentlemen, we have done jury selection. The next portion of the trial will become what is called opening statements. Both the state and the defense will have an opportunity to outline to you what they anticipate the evidence to show. At the conclusion of the opening statement will come to what is called the presentation of evidence. At this point in time, the state will have the opportunity to go first because they have the burden of proving each and every material element beyond a reasonable doubt. Once they have done their opening statements, then the defense will have an opportunity to give its opening statement. And then we will have the presentation of evidence. All right? Mr. James, you may proceed. I'm sorry. Ms. Hill, you may proceed.
Forbidden romance that ends in murder. Silence, despite her suspicions. Lies, to conceal the truth from her family, her friends, the police, and ladies and gentlemen, even to a jury. That is what the evidence in this case will show about the defendant in this case, Andrea Sneiderman, and her relationship with Hemi Newman, her boss, her lover, and the man that murdered her husband, Rusty Sneiderman. The evidence will show how their relationship ended in the murder of her husband. The evidence will show that she suspected Hemi Newman immediately. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that she lied. Throughout the investigation and throughout the trial of her husband's murderer. That is what the evidence will show. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that the defendant was married to Russell Sneiderman. He was affectionately known as Rusty. And they had a young girl, Sophia, and a young boy, Ian. In the year of 2010, they were entering their 10th year of marriage. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear in April of that year, she took a job with General Electric, GE, as a quality systems manager. This was the first time that she'd had a job in corporate America. In fact, the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, up until this point, she worked out of a home office as a consultant. So she was excited about this new phase of her life. She was starting a new job. And you'll hear evidence, ladies and gentlemen, that at that job, her boss or her supervisor at GE was a man by the name of Hemi Newman. Hemi Newman became her mentor almost immediately. And you'll hear that he gave her assignments and responsibilities that were rewarding to her. They were professionally fulfilling to her. And you'll also hear, ladies and gentlemen, that their mentorship and their work relationship quickly turned into a friendship. And during this friendship, you'll hear that they shared things about personal matters as well as work-related matters with one another. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that she embraced the new challenges of her job. And the evidence will show that they began traveling together for work almost immediately. In fact, in May of 2010, just 1 month into her new job, they took their first trip together to Melbourne, Florida. And you will hear that this was the first of several trips they took throughout the course of that summer. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show over that summer and during these trips, the friendship developed into a romantic relationship. And this relationship, it included romantic emails, poems, dinner, wine, dancing, kissing. That's what the evidence will show. And you'll also see, ladies and gentlemen, that throughout this relationship, she started to experience conflicting feelings. You see, at one minute, you'll see she was completely in with him. She'd be involved in this behavior with him, and then all of a sudden, she'd start to pull back. She'd stop and say, well, we can't do this. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear it in her own words through an email that she sent to Hemi, where she acknowledges that she's conflicted internally. She's having to struggle between anger and selfishness. She feels torn between her reality and her desires. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that her reality was that she and Rusty were not at the happiest point of their marriage during this time. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that there was tension at home. And you'll hear that the defendant started to develop feelings of resentment. She started to resent the fact that she felt that for their 10 years of marriage, most of their time was focused on Rusty. Most of their time was spent making sure that Rusty was happy. She felt that she had stood by and made sure that Rusty could find professional fulfillment, which he was trying to do at that time. And you'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that because of this resentment, she started to feel like she was entitled to some happiness too. And the evidence will show that she found that happiness. She found that happiness in her new job. She was now in corporate America. She found that happiness. She had a boss who admired her. He validated her. He complimented her. In fact, you'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, he told her she was beautiful. He professed his love for her at some point. He even asked her, ladies and gentlemen, to consider marrying him. That's what the evidence in this case will show. And you'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that throughout this relationship, these feelings, the conflict, caused her to have inconsistent behavior. And you'll see the emails that reflect this. 7 months into this new job, 7 months into this relationship with Hemi Newman, her husband was shot to death. And he was shot to death after he had dropped their 2-year-old son Ian off at the Dunwoody Prep Daycare Center. You'll hear evidence, ladies and gentlemen, from witnesses to the shooting, and they'll tell you that the police were called. They gave the police information about what they witnessed. They gave a description of the shooter. They told the police that the shooter had on what appeared to be a fake beard. They also told the police that the shooter left the scene in a van, but the van didn't have a license plate. So, ladies and gentlemen, the police will tell you they had no idea who had shot Rusty Sneiderman. And they had no idea why someone would want him dead. But the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, other than the shooter, there was one other person who knew why the shooter wanted Rusty dead. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that that person is sitting at this table. And despite the fact that she knew why someone would want Rusty dead, she concealed that information. She hid it from the police. She didn't tell the police about the relationship. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that the police, they had no leads. They didn't know where to start looking for why someone would shoot and kill Rusty Sneiderman. And the evidence will be that they went to her home the day after the shooting, on November 19th, and they interviewed her in her home. And they asked specific questions, and some of those questions, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear were for the purpose of developing leads in the investigation, so that they would know where to start looking so they could apprehend the person who had shot and killed her husband. And they specifically asked her, well, is anyone interested in you? And her answer, ladies and gentlemen, was, well, my boss, Hemi Newman. So the police asked her about that. And she said, well, one time on a trip, he made a pass at me. But I didn't respond. Shut it down. That was it. And the police asked her, so you all were okay enough to kind of move beyond that and continue on with work? And she said yes. She lied. She didn't tell the police that it was more than a one-time thing. She didn't tell the police about the relationship. She didn't tell the police about the trips they took together and the fact that he expressed his love for her. She didn't tell the police that he told her he wanted to marry her and to make her and her children happy. She didn't tell the police, ladies and gentlemen, that she sent him close to 200 pictures of her children after he said he wanted to raise them. She didn't tell them, ladies and gentlemen, that the relationship had progressed to a point where she was torn. And she didn't tell them, ladies and gentlemen, that she was responsible for bringing Hemi Newman into their home and introducing Rusty to his murderer. So you see, although she mentioned his name, she concealed the truth. She hid it. She kept the police from being able to figure out who shot and killed her husband out in the care center. Not only did she hide the relationship, ladies and gentlemen, she hid the suspicions that she had. The suspicions of his guilt. The suspicions of his culpability in shooting her husband down in cold blood outside of their son's daycare center. She hid that from the police. Because if the police had known about the relationship, they would have known why someone wanted Rusty dead. And she concealed the fact that would have given them that information. She concealed the fact of the relationship. She concealed the fact that she suspected him immediately. She didn't tell the police that, but she told her girlfriends, and you'll hear that. She told her girlfriends that long before Hemi was ever arrested. You'll hear that she told her friends, when I look at that sketch that the police did, I see my boss's eyes. She didn't tell the police that. And ladies and gentlemen, the police will tell you that if they had not been misled, they would have been able to identify Rusty's killer long before 2 months when Hemi was finally arrested. They would have told you that the information she kept from them, that the lies she told them, hindered that investigation and kept them from being able to make an arrest in her husband's murder. You'll also hear, ladies and gentlemen, that when the police questioned her about her boss, she misled them. If they asked her another question about Hemi, what she'd say is, I think you're going the wrong way with this Hemi thing. It's nothing. He's not the kind of person that would do that. She misled the police. But at the same time, she told her girlfriends she thought it was Hemi. Police will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if they knew about that relationship, they would have knocked on Hemi Newman's door that very day. But they didn't know about it because she hid it. Now, throughout the course of this trial, ladies and gentlemen, the state will bring you evidence. And that evidence will come in many forms. You may get documents, such as emails, telephone records, travel documents. There'll also be witnesses that are presented to you, and they'll take the stand and they'll testify and present evidence to you. And there may be times when we will call a witness that may appear to be taken out of chronological order. Just know that that's being done to accommodate a schedule. But we ask that you pay close attention to what that witness is telling you. And if you feel the need, take notes. You will also, ladies and gentlemen, see clips, video clips from a trial proceeding where you may see faces and other lawyers that are not with us here today. But those clips are also evidence for your consideration. And when you watch those clips, you can give them whatever weight you deem appropriate in your deliberations. So that's just some of the types of evidence that you all will be presented with throughout the course of this trial. And ladies and gentlemen, that evidence that will be presented through these witnesses and those documents, they will show you information about the relationship that the defendant had with Hemi Newman. And as I told you before, the evidence will show that they took a trip at least once a month for the entire time that she was employed with GE. You'll hear that during some of these trips, they specifically requested adjoining rooms. And when I say adjoining rooms, the evidence will show that these are the rooms that are next to one another. And inside the rooms, there's a door. And you can go back and forth in between the rooms without ever going into the hallway. You'll hear evidence of that. You'll also hear, ladies and gentlemen, evidence that in some of these locations, on some of these trips, they both were present in the location, but there was only one hotel reservation. The other information, ladies and gentlemen, you'll get will be emails. Emails that document some of the activity that went on during some of these trips. You'll see an email where Hemi talks about them waking up together in Denver. You'll see an email where he talks about her putting her head on his shoulder while they look at the stars. You'll see emails that chronicle the planning of some of these trips and some of these activities. You'll see emails where she references her feelings and the struggle that she's having. The struggle between anger and selfishness. The struggle between desire and reality. You'll see an email where she actually tells Hemi about the tension that's now in her home between her and Rusty when she returned from a trip with Hemi. You'll also, ladies and gentlemen, see emails where she expresses her anger to Hemi. And she blames him for this struggle she's having. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that she was raised to not believe in divorce. And there's no evidence that she intended to divorce Rusty at this time. So those feelings that caused her to pull away will be evident in her behavior and in the emails. You'll see an on again, off again, back and forth kind of relationship. The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, she'd get over these feelings within weeks, sometimes within days, and she'd be engaged in the very same behavior, sending mixed messages. The evidence will show she wanted it both ways. Some of the witnesses you'll hear from, ladies and gentlemen, will be a lady by the name of Miss Shana Citron. And at the time, Miss Citron was the defendant's best friend. And Miss Citron will tell you that she remembers having a conversation with the defendant. She remembers the two of them talking, they had lunch, and the defendant was telling Miss Citron about her new job. She was telling her about the travel that she was doing. She mentioned her new boss. And Miss Citron will tell you that as the defendant was talking to her, she had an opportunity to see her and to see her facial expressions. And during this conversation, the defendant also told her friend about the struggles that she and Rusty were having. Miss Citron will tell you when she had that conversation with the defendant as a friend, she immediately started to be concerned about the marriage. And she asked the defendant, "Oh my God, has something already happened with you and this boss?" And the defendant said no. She denied it. So when she lied to her friend, Miss Citron will tell you, when she denied it, I didn't push any further. Another witness you'll hear from, ladies and gentlemen, is a young lady by the name of Christina Oliveira. Now, Miss Oliveira is a waitress, and she's a waitress in a place called the Pulse nightclub. It's in Greenville, South Carolina. And Miss Oliveira will tell you that during this trip to South Carolina, she saw the defendant and Hemi. She saw them at Pulse together. And she'll tell you that she saw the two of them. They were dancing. They were kissing one another on the lips. They were groping each other like they were a couple, romantically involved, out on a date. You'll even see a receipt where Miss Oliveira read the two of them up, and you'll see on that receipt where she identifies the table as the dinner couple. You'll hear from Miss Citron, and she'll tell you what she saw. You'll also, ladies and gentlemen, see an email that will bring you. And in that email, the defendant references one of the trips that they took together. And she references dinner, and that evening being one of the best she'd ever had. And it's too bad she wouldn't be able to have it again. In that same exchange about dinner and the wonderful evening, she talks about feeling as though she betrayed everyone. She talks about not knowing how she was going to live with herself. She talks about feeling a need to repent for the rest of her life because of what she had done. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to note, because right after that email, you'll hear evidence that it's after this exchange that she sends pictures to him of her children. On again, off again. In, out. Conflict. within. Another witness you'll hear from, ladies and gentlemen, is Miss Melanie White. Now, Ms. White will come to you and she'll tell you she's a friend of Hemi Newman. In fact, she's a real estate agent who sold him his home. And she'll tell you that she met with Mr. Newman and he was confiding in her. He told her he was having financial problems and he was thinking about a short sale on his house or maybe even a foreclosure. And she'll also tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that he continued to confide in her and he told her about a woman at work that he was interested in. And he shared things with Miss White about this woman and about the relationship that the two of them had. And he told her about the trips that they took together. And Miss White will come in and she'll testify, ladies and gentlemen, that Hemi even called her. He called her from one of the trips that they took to Greenville together. And in this telephone conversation, Hemi mentioned to Ms. White, well, you know, we just finished dinner. Soon we're going to be going up to our room. What should I do? And she's going to tell you that she told him, Hemi, you need to go to your room alone, lock your door, and stay away from her. And she'll tell you she didn't hear from Hemi anymore that night. The next time she talked to Hemi was when they had left Greenville, and he dropped her off at her home in Dunwoody, and he called Miss White. And he told Miss White about the trip, and he told Miss White that she gave in. She gave in during that trip. And Miss White will tell you that she said, Hemi, you know you shouldn't have done that. She'll also be able to give you other details that will shed light on this relationship. Now, the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that the last trip they took together was in October of 2010. It was another trip to Greenville. And the emails will show that after this trip, she was angry with Hemi again. And the two of them had agreed that they wouldn't communicate about anything except work during this time frame. And during this period, the defendant took a cruise with her husband. She took a cruise with Rusty. And the evidence will show the day after they docked, she had Hemi Newman at her home. And the evidence will show at some point while he was there during this visit, Rusty was home as well. And 2 days later, Rusty was shot dead. That was the morning of November 18th. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that morning at 9:25 a.m. she was at work. And she got a phone call from the daycare center. The person who called her told her, Ian's fine, but you need to get here. There's been an accident involving Rusty. And she left work. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, 2 minutes later, the very first person she called was Hemi Newman. And she's en route to the daycare center to find out what happened to her husband because they didn't tell her. And I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to listen because you'll hear that before she gets to the daycare center, she calls Rusty's father, Don Sneiderman. And Mr. Sneiderman will take the stand. And he'll tell you that Andrea called him. The evidence will show she called him at 9:30, 5 minutes after she got the call from the daycare center. And in this conversation, Mr. Sneiderman will tell you that the defendant said to him, Rusty's been shot. I'm so sorry. Pay close attention. Because not only will the witness say it, you'll hear her say it. She said, "No one would tell me what happened to Rusty. I didn't know Rusty had been shot until I got to the hospital," which was well over an hour after that phone call. Well over an hour after she told Donald Sneiderman that Rusty had been shot. She says it, he says it. You'll also hear from other witnesses, her friend, her best friend, and a co-worker, who'll tell you that she called them as well that morning, before she ever made it to the hospital. And she told them that Rusty had been shot. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sneiderman will take the stand and he'll tell you about that phone call. And he'll tell you that when she told him Rusty had been shot, he didn't believe her. He couldn't fathom that somebody would shoot his son. So he picked up the phone because he didn't have any other information, and he called the daycare center. And he tried to find out what happened. And he'll tell you that when he hung up, they were able to confirm for him that Rusty had been shot. His other son, Steve, was traveling that morning. And Mr. Sneiderman will tell you that after he learned and confirmed that Rusty had been shot, he sent Steve an email saying, "Rusty's been shot." He didn't know his condition at that point. So he told his son, Steve, "Continue on, I'll update you." And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, at about 11 o'clock that morning, after Don Sneiderman spoke to someone at the hospital, he sent Steve a second email saying, "Rusty's dead. You need to start making your way home." Mr. Sneiderman will tell you he's very clear about what happened that morning. In fact, he'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it was the day that he felt that his life stopped. And he'll never forget the events of that morning. You'll always, also, ladies and gentlemen, have an opportunity to hear and see evidence of the defendant when she arrived at the daycare center. And you'll see that she jumps out of her car, she falls into the arms of a police officer. She's devastated. They take her inside of the daycare immediately, place her in an office as a holding area while she waited for her parents. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that when she's in that office, in the holding area at the daycare center, before her parents arrive, moments after she's devastated and falling into the arms of a police officer, she calls Hemi Newman again. She doesn't get him. Shortly thereafter, her parents get to the daycare center, and they left and went home to the defendant's house in Dunwoody, which is not far from the daycare center. She went home to change clothes so that she could go to the hospital, where her husband's now being pronounced dead. And while she's at home, so she can go to the, changing clothes so she can go to the hospital, the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, she called Hemi Newman one more time. She doesn't get him. That's what the evidence will show. The evidence, ladies and gentlemen, will show she called Hemi several times that morning. Not only did she call him, but she texted him. And the fact that she called Hemi, and the fact that she texted Hemi, she hid from the police. She didn't tell him. The evidence will also show, ladies and gentlemen, not only the fact of the calls and the text messages, but the proof of the calls from her telephone handset had been deleted before she turned it over. She suspected him immediately, but she hid her suspicion, and she hid the evidence that would have told the police about events the morning her husband was shot and killed. And ladies and gentlemen, you will hear that she does not give the police much more information, excuse me, until January of 2011, around the time that Hemi's arrested. And you'll have an opportunity to hear an interview that the police did with her on January 5th. And they share with her that they've made an arrest. They arrested someone for the murder of her husband. And they told her it was her boss, Hemi Newman. And you'll hear her, oh, Hemi. You'll hear her on the tape. And you'll also hear the police as they kind of confront her and ask her, so what do you think Hemi told us? Oh, well, that he loves me and that he wants to marry me? It's the first time she ever said that. First time she ever told the police that was when they confronted her, and she didn't know what Hemi had said at that point. And ladies and gentlemen, when you hear that interview, I want you to compare it to what she told them the day after the shooting, when she said, well, my boss, but you know, it was a one-time thing. It was nothing. You're barking up the wrong tree. Compare the January statement to that first statement. The other thing I ask you to do, ladies and gentlemen, is when you listen to the statement that she gave in January, you'll hear her tell the police, well, you know, I started to suspect Hemi last week, around the 28th of December. And the evidence will be clear, ladies and gentlemen. Contrast it with what she told her friends long before December 28th, that she suspected Hemi Newman. You'll have an opportunity to hear that evidence. So you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, that she hid evidence and she concealed it and she remained silent. She didn't tell them that she was a willing participant with Hemi Newman in this relationship. And she certainly didn't tell them about all of the activity and involvement and feelings that were involved in that relationship. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that she was afraid of what telling the truth would mean for her. And not only does she conceal the truth during the investigation, the evidence will show that she continued to conceal the truth and to give testimony that was not true to a jury during the trial of the State versus Hemi Newman. The trial that involved the man who murdered her husband. And you will hear, ladies and gentlemen, that when she testified in that case, she came into this very courtroom. She took this very witness stand, ladies and gentlemen, right here, and she raised her hand. And she swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The evidence in this case will show that is not what she did. She continued to hide evidence, conceal evidence, and tell lies. So, ladies and gentlemen, just like she misled her family and her friends, just like she misled the police, just like she misled that jury, the evidence will be clear that misleading them, concealing information, and lying to them hindered an investigation, hindered the apprehension of a criminal that criminal being the man that murdered her husband. She gave false information and false statements to the police. And the evidence will show that she lied during judicial proceedings. The evidence in this case will show a forbidden romance that ends in murder. Silence despite her suspicions, and lies to conceal the truth from her family, from her friends, from the police, and from a jury. So we ask, ladies and gentlemen, that you listen closely to the evidence as it's presented in this case. And at the end, when you've heard everything, and you go in the back to deliberate, we ask that you return a verdict that speaks the truth and not a lie. Find the defendant guilty on all charges. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before the defense have an opportunity to outline what they anticipate the evidence to show, I'm going to give you just a short break in the jury room. I'm going to give you these short breaks to not discuss the case, keep an open mind. With the assistance of my deputy, there's going to be a relatively short break to refresh yourselves, stand up and stretch. It's going to be in the neighborhood of 10 minutes. Mr. Deputy, if you would assist.
Sir, all right. Ready to see it?